What's up, everybody, and welcome into Awesemo's NBA strategy show here for the beginning of a brand new week. It is Monday, January 4th. That's right. A new year, new week, and same old NBA. If you happen to be up late watching that duel between Steph Curry dropping 62 on Dame Lillard and the Blazers, it was a ton of fun, although I think the really lesser thing that is being talked about from that game is the fact that Enes Kanter went for 24 and 12. But even still, heck of a game for Curry with Klay Thompson obviously cheering him on from afar. A couple members of the 60-point club. We got a lot to cover in the next little while, looking ahead to tonight's 9-game slate. So join us, jump into YouTube chat, most especially. I would say be with us in the Awesemo Premium NBA Slack channel as well. But we are, and it's contributed to our delay here this morning. Normally we would start about 10, 15 minutes ago, having some Slack issues. But hey, technology, 2020 was a dud. 2021 is off to a rocky start. Greg Ehrenberg is here with me. How are you, buddy?
Yeah, well, it would be cool if we had Slack chat because, we're going this morning. It's like, can we get the link to the show? What's going on? It's like, is Kaufman not going to show? Kaufman's first day of work, first day doing the strategy shows. Where is he? And then we realized we're just sending Slack messages into the void because nobody could see them. But yeah, very excited to be doing a show.
Are you guys saying you want my phone number at this point? Is that a more efficient way of reaching?
I want you to follow me on Twitter, Kaufman. That's really what I want. Follow me on Twitter.
Damn it. It was always something. Yeah, give us all a follow on Twitter. Follow Greg, follow me, follow Awesemo most especially, and all the great content that is available to you. If you are here with us on YouTube, by the way, people nice and patient. I see we've already got up over 50 likes, but we need to do a lot better than that. So smash that like button, hit the subscribe button here on the Awesemo YouTube channel, and we appreciate your support. We'll probably call for that a couple dozen more times over the next 45 minutes or an hour, however long we're hanging out. But how you feeling about tonight's NBA slate? And if you want to, any lingering thoughts from last night, because it was a pretty wild day.
Yeah, so we can get right into this, and the slate for tonight, it's hard to really make a lot of it as of now, just because we have so many key injuries. We have James Harden is questionable, Luka Doncic is questionable. Both of them missed their last games. That was key for last night's slate, is that Luka ended up not playing, open up a ton of value with Jalen Brunson going off at nearly minimum price. So it's going to be hard to really know what lineups are going to look like and what the best players are going to look like at this time in the morning. So I think what we're really going to have to focus on is these guys, their injuries, and then if they play, what do we make them? If they're out, who are the value plays? Because it's going to have a massive impact on the slate and how we go about building lineups.
And just to pick up on where you mentioned the Luka being questionable, that was something that I think caught a lot of people off guard last night and quickly became kind of a guessing game, at least going into it. I know I was in this position when it came to lineup building. It's okay, do you want Brunson or do you want Burke? And, similarly priced within $100 of each other, both, especially if you look at the all the great Awesemo tools in terms of fantasy projections and value and who's the better play and all that. These are two guys that were expected to be 7, 8, 9x value, with the effectively $3,000, $3,200, $3,300, $3,400 price tag. But it was a function of choosing the right way and, kind of waiting, who's going to start. Turns out being Brunson, he goes for like 50 fantasy points. Is it a similar environment here again? If let's say Luka doesn't play, are you just quickly locking in Brunson, or more often than not in these situations, are you just waiting to find out who is going to start and who's going to have the most availability?
All right, so as of yesterday, when Luka was first ruled out, we didn't know. Well, at first, he was questionable. So going into lock, we didn't even know for sure. But then afterwards, it was kind of a guessing game as to who would start. But then when we finally got the starting lineup and Jalen Brunson was starting, it became more clear that he was going to be the best play there. And now looking at tonight's rotations and how I would project it if Luka was to be out, I would assume the same rotations as last night. So you were comparing Brunson to Trey Burke, which I think is fair. And going into the game, we maybe weren't totally sure how the minutes would shake out. Brunson ended up playing 37 minutes last game. Trey Burke plays 17. So I think we have to consider pretty much the same thing would happen again for this slate. So if Luka's out, Brunson pretty easily becomes the top value play. And then Trey Burke would be more of a GPP play that you could use as a pivot off of Brunson. But Brunson would probably be an all-in play for me.
So are there similar types of guys? Just again, I know we'll go position by position. We'll look at the studs, the mid tiers, the values, all that kind of stuff. But is there kind of a similar Brunson-like player tonight that you're already thinking about that, boy, you want to consider locking this guy in, or is a lot of it dependent upon the several hours we have between now and lineup lock where we start to have some of that injury news revealed?
Yeah, so I mean, like I always make an initial build before I do these shows, just so I have an idea of, hey, here are the guys who I'm rostering if the slate was to lock right now. Thankfully, the slate does not lock right now because we don't know who the hell is playing or anything like that. But so one cheap guard who I did get a decent amount of exposure to on a first build was Delon Wright. But with that said, I don't think he's going to end up being a guy I have a ton of exposure to later in the day, depending on what happens with Luka Doncic and James Harden. Because if either or both of these guys are out, it opens up so much value on the slate that it totally changes who the best plays are. But right now, Delon Wright at 4,000 on DraftKings, he would be a guard play that I would be looking at for value right now if we don't get some of the other value to open up in this spot in the other injury spots.
Not just that, our own Alex Baker has Wright projected for about 28 points as things stand right now. So you're talking basically what, 7x value, pretty close to it. So obviously good value play if you're thinking about building out the bottom of your lineup, trying to fit in whichever stud it is. And get those questions in, folks. We will monitor the YouTube chat, let you know if anything jumps out that we can help you out, answer this first of many shows over the course of the day. I know there'll be a whole bunch of questions leading into lock a lot later on with guys like, and you mentioned Harden and Luka, and obviously those questionable tags as we sit here right now, but you also have Giannis, Joel Embiid, Steph Curry, who, as we said, bananas last night, about 80 fantasy points on DraftKings, Trae Young, Andre Drummond, guys like that. Who does jump out at you as, this is the guy, or these are the two guys, these are the ones I'd like to have in my lineup if we're to presume everybody's healthy?
Yeah, so I mean, if everybody's healthy, that's a totally different situation than if James Harden and Luka Doncic are out. Because as of right now, the guy that I would want to pay up for the most relative to salary is Luka, and that's assuming that everything would be okay because he's playing against the Houston Rockets, and that it's a spot where he should be able to have a good fantasy night, assuming there's no kind of restrictions on him or anything like that. And he got off to a little bit of a slow start this season, but did play well in his last game, nearly triple-doubled against the Heat, finished with just under 60 fantasy points. So I do kind of feel like he's starting to get a little bit back on track, and the price is still down because for the majority of last year, we saw Doncic get priced up, pretty high over the 12,000 price tag range when Kristaps Porzingis was out. And we still have to consider that to open the year, Dallas doesn't have Porzingis in the lineup. And if you look at Doncic's numbers last year without KP in there, he was somebody who scored over 60 fantasy points per 36 minutes. The usage rating was super high. So Doncic is in a really good spot to play well going forward. I think some of his struggles early in the year could be attributed to him maybe coming into the season not in tip-top shape. And I think that's something that he should be able to play himself in as the season goes along. Last game is definitely his best one so far. But with that said, like we have to keep mentioning, we just don't know what his health situation is as of now.
All right. Well, you ready to go a little position by position?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, as mentioned tonight, there are 9 games, all beginning as early as 7 o'clock Eastern. So you got a pretty big slate to work with here. Starts with the Cavs and Magic, Hornets and Sixers. And then, of course, you're going to get into 7:30 games and so on and so forth. Only one late game tonight. That is the Kings and Warriors. I'm sure a lot of people will have the recency bias of Steph doing what he did last night. Should we roster him again? Is he automatic? Let's begin at the specifically point guard position, unless you want to go, a little more wide ranging and think guards in general, but that, you start to get into flex spots and things like that. As far as the point guard, are you going right back to paying up and playing Steph Curry, or are there other guys that stand out to you more so when you're thinking about that upper tier?
Yeah, so this is another situation where we kind of have to see what happens with James Harden and Luka Doncic. Because let's say both of these guys are out, then all of a sudden a ton of value opens up and we need guys to pay up for. So the one thing that would stand out there about Steph Curry is with us needing players to roster if there's all that value on the high end. And Curry's somebody who, after his big game last night, the price point didn't really move on him. And if you look at his numbers, he's not going to score 62 points again, but his usage rating was ridiculous. He had a 50% usage rating. And I think he's very live to lead the league in scoring this year because we didn't see Curry much last year. But if you go back to 2 years ago when both Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant were off the court, which is the situation we have now with Curry, he had a usage rating of right around 40%. He scored over 40 points per 36 minutes. So Steph Curry is going to take on a massive usage rating this year, and he's going to have a ton of really big scoring games. So even though last night was a little bit of an outlier, obviously, I think it's still very telling of what his role is going to look like in the offense. And for the Warriors to be successful this year, Steph Curry's probably going to have to be near the league leaders in usage. He's going to have to take a ton of shots and he's going to have to score a ton. So Steph Curry's price hasn't adjusted from the game he had last night. So in the first builds that I did where I don't have James Harden or Luka Doncic in the player pool, Curry comes out as one of my higher owned players, and I think that's right. I know that his ownership is probably going to be a little bit inflated, coming in a little over 20% after the game he had yesterday. But I think that if we get enough value where it's easy to pay up for him, then I'm fine with that. I still think you can make a case that the ownership wouldn't be high enough.
What's a bounce back look like? I know Alex has him projected for about 49 points, but then again, he was projected for something similar last night and, had one of those outlier games where he absolutely went crazy, as we know. So, what's realistic for a guy at $9,300?
Yeah, I mean, well, even if you look at his games this year, despite the Warriors being a little bit disappointing and not playing well, I mean, Curry's still averaging over 50 fantasy points per game. His fantasy point total so far, 56, 48, 45, 75 over the last 4 games. So because the usage is so high for him, it doesn't really matter if he's not necessarily making, like 90% of his threes or whatever crazy it was last night, because he's still going to get his shots up. He is still going to have a primary facilitating role in the offense. So, I mean, I have him projected to average somewhere in between 6 and 7 assists per game this year. So I think that it's probably pretty reasonable to expect that he scores over 50 fantasy points in this spot against the Kings more often than not.
All right. How about that next level of guards? Obviously, when it comes to top tier, you can't help but think about Harden. And like we said, obviously, Steph talked a great deal about him, Trae Young, De'Aaron Fox even. But, you start to look down just a little bit. Let's see who we really like in terms of returning value as well. Some of that next range. I mean, you tell me, is it, you look at Gildress Alexander, you're looking at John Wall, you're looking at Buddy Hield starts to obviously get into the shooting guard position. Derrick Rose is eligible for both spots. Who stands out to you?
So one guy who I got a good amount of exposure to in my first build is De'Aaron Fox going up against the Warriors. So something else to consider about Golden State, they are playing on the tail end of a back-to-back after the big game that Steph had last night. So there could be a little bit of fatigue there. And look at the role that De'Aaron Fox is playing in the Kings offense this year. He's taken a big step forward in terms of usage rating right around 30% to open the season. And I think that's what we're going to see from Fox. If remember last year, he played well when he was on the court, but he also dealt with a couple of serious ankle injuries that inhibited him a little bit. He was a little slow coming back, and then it also hampered him a little bit throughout the season. I think that he's somebody who's going to have a pretty big breakout year in terms of going from a guy who's a well above average point guard to probably playing, around an all-star level. I think that he's somebody who I probably would expect to make the all-star team if the West wasn't so deep at the guard position. But I think he's poised to have a really big fantasy season, especially when you consider some of the usage rating, some of the recent usage rating for him, over 31% each of the last 2 games. And he wasn't super efficient shooting the ball in those games, 8 of 19 from the field, 9 of 23. Still scored over 20 fantasy points, averaged over 40 DraftKings points in those games. But the usage is there and the shots are there. And considering the pace and the environment that I think this game is going to be played at, the total on this game is opened up at 231, which is the highest on the slate by a pretty wide margin. I think this is a game that we're going to want to target. So De'Aaron Fox in the mid range is the point guard that I'm honing in on as of now.
All right. So if we buckle down to value, I know you spent time talking about Wright, and obviously at 4K is a great option. You could go even lower than that. The likes of Aaron Holiday, TJ McConnell. These are guys that are projected to have good nights, right around 3,500, but not expected anyway to eclipse 20 fantasy points based on Awesemo's projections. You pay up a little bit, start to look at the George Hills. I don't know if he, gravitates a little bit more toward mid-tier based on, he's not a De'Aaron Fox level salary, obviously, but still sub 5K. Who jumps out?
Yeah, I mentioned Delon Wright. If we're looking for a GPP play, I think LaMelo Ball, somebody I'll have a little more exposure to the field then. It looks like his minutes are trending up. I expect he's going to be a pretty high variance player in his rookie season, so not somebody to consider in cash games, but only projecting for 2% ownership in GPP. Looks like I'm going to have a little bit higher than that. As for other value plays, it's just kind of a wait and see for me because we have James Harden and Luka Doncic both questionable, and they have so much pull on the slate. So Brunson is by far going to be the best value play at the guard position if Doncic gets ruled out. And then for Harden, if he doesn't end up playing, then John Wall is going to be somebody who we're also going to want to get into a bunch of lineups, because John Wall last game with Harden out ended up scoring 50 fantasy points, had a 36% usage rating. So I think that in any game that we don't have Harden, I think John Wall is going to have just massive fantasy output. And then the same thing is going to go the other way, where in games where John Wall's resting, which I assume is going to happen on a lot of back-to-backs, right? Because it's been over 2 years since we've seen John Wall on the court. He's coming off a torn Achilles, a torn ACL. So I think he's probably going to rest in back-to-back situations. And when that happens, we're going to see massive usage rating for James Harden. And if this is a spot where James Harden's out, I expect John Wall to have another big game. So those are just the injuries that I think we really have to pay attention to, and makes it a little hard to know exactly what to target the point guard position right now.
Our producer Jordan's out here in the YouTube channel just trolling people, calling Andrew Wiggins a YMCA level player. He's going in hard at people. We have a whole bunch of Wiggins defenders out there living in the YouTube channel. Folks, I'm sorry if we're not acknowledging your Awesemo Premium Slack comments if you're on Slack in the first place, but I'm guessing you're not, because it appears it is down across the globe, making work from home people suffer to start off their first work week of 2021, because evidently 2020 is not dead yet, much to our chagrin what we thought. But we are keeping an eye on the YouTube channel here and appreciate all the great commentary. Keep smashing the like button, up over 100. Let's make the push to 200 with about 600 people watching this show, the NBA Strategy Show, here with us on a Monday. Comes your way 10 a.m. Eastern every single day. You'll get us multiple times a week as well. So, strap on in, have a good time, obviously. Let's see. Let's go to the shooting guard position here, as we have just crossed past the 10:30 mark. So there's, James Harden, who obviously we talked about, eligible for both guard spots. He's a question mark right now. If he plays, naturally always a good play, and a guy that could do what Steph did last night. I mean, he could go for, 75 points any given day. Right behind him, though, in terms of the projections, you have Jaylen Brown, who, much like DeLon Wright, he is like Dylon from Chappelle. He's spitting hot fire like crazy. Jaylen Brown had 31 actual points last night. He is the Celtics' leading scorer right now. Doesn't seem like, no matter how good Jason Tatum has been, Jaylen Brown is just right there to match his intensity and production out there on the floor. Is that a guy at $8,300 projected for north of 40 points that you want your lineup?
You were just dying to ask me Celtics questions, weren't you, Kaufman? You've been sitting ever since you saw me on the schedule together. You're like, we're gonna talk about all the Celtics in depth. So I'm gonna
one of them.
I'm gonna throw something you now. In terms of the Celtics' best players so far this year, it's been Jaylen Brown, right? Is that crazy to say? Yeah, I mean, he's been terrific.
Jason Tatum has multiple game-winning shots, and he's missed one or two as well. But yeah, in terms of overall consistent production, it's been Jaylen Brown. He has been the guy so far. Now, that doesn't mean that big picture he's the better player, overall. Like if you were putting out an NBA player power ranking, as everybody does in the preseason and multiple times throughout the year, if you were to do that right now, is Jaylen Brown a better player than Jason Tatum? I don't think people would say that. But in terms of the production on the floor through the first 7 games of the season, yeah, it's been Brown. My question is, and it's obviously we're talking about the Celtics right now, but it's a question for any of the handful, half dozen plus teams in the NBA that have the legitimate 1-2 punch, where both these guys are going to get 20 plus points a game, actual points, and both these guys can go off any given night. I never know what the best way is to attack these teams from a fantasy perspective, because like maybe Brown does go off tonight and Tatum also goes off, or it's a quieter night for one of them, and it becomes a function of, like we say in the NFL all the time, and you're looking at like, oh, who's Russell Wilson going to throw to tonight? Is it going to be Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp? How do you pick the right guy? Because obviously a lot of the time in the NBA, and I guess NFL as well, if one guy goes off, he's taking production opportunity away from the other. So it's all a long-winded way, as I typically will do, of asking you Brown versus Tatum, or, Durant versus Kyrie, or, so on and so forth. There's so many of these. How do you know when to choose?
Yeah, well, here's the good news. I don't like either of them tonight, so I don't really think we'd have to choose. So So here's Jaylen Brown's been terrific this year, and I have poo-pooed on him in the past. I made fun of the Celtics when they signed him to that massive contract. Mea culpa, I was wrong. Jaylen Brown's terrific. Now, with that said, Kaufman, let's look at his numbers to open the season in the last few games. The fantasy production is terrific.
Yeah.
13 of 16 from the field last game. The game before, 12 of 20. The game before, 15 of 21. These are all terrific shooting nights, but it's not sustainable. So the issue is now his price has gone so high up. And look at last game. So last game, he made 13 of 16 shots and scored 36 fantasy points. Mm-hmm. So that's fine. But even that it's not enough fantasy output for an 8,300 price tag. And then you also have to consider there's no way he shoots that efficiently every night. Like even if I've admitted I'm wrong on Jaylen Brown, he's not somebody who's going to shoot 13 of 16 from the floor every day. Because if that's the case, he's just the best player in NBA history by far. And there's nothing to debate. You would love that to happen, but it's not going to be the case.
You haven't heard?
So the issue is that I expect shooting regression, and his price has gone up to the point where this is by far the most expensive he's ever been. 8,300. We've never seen a price point this high on Jaylen Brown. And the reality is that unless he continues to shoot 70, 75% from the field, he's not going to be able to continue paying off this price tag. So what's going to happen is eventually he's going to shoot, and he's probably still going to be relatively efficient, but eventually he's going to make like 50% of his shots from the field and be like, oh, that's a nice game. But then he's no longer scoring around 40 fantasy points because it's less shots than he's making now. So the 8,300 price tag is it's a little bit too steep for me to roster him.
All right. So that in mind, who are these upper tier shooting guards you looking at? Let's say Harden is unavailable. You already said you don't like Brown. At that point, it becomes, it's Fred VanVleet, it's Buddy Hield, it's Colin Sexton, RJ Barrett, Jordan's guy, Andrew Wiggins, guys like that. Who stands out?
All right, so this is another spot where we kind of need to wait on some injury information, because one guy that I would like a decent amount is Colin Sexton. So Darius Garland, Colin Sexton, they've made up the Sexland backcourt. It's been terrific. It's my favorite nickname in basketball right now. Darius Garland off to a really strong start to the year. He's dealing with a shoulder injury. He's listed as questionable to play. So if he is ruled out, then we have a situation where there's going to be some value that opens up in the Cavaliers backcourt, and then we're also going to probably see a bunch of usage go towards Colin Sexton. We haven't seen these guys play on the court all that much until this year. So it's hard to know what the usage will look like. That and Darius Garland is so much better this year than he was last year. But my suspicion would be that we just see a ton of usage go towards Sexton. So if that's the case, Sexton at 7,100 would be a really strong play. But on the flip side, if Garland plays, I don't have any interest in Colin Sexton. So this is why the injuries matter a lot. And also why there's value in our Slack chat when it's actually working and Slack is up and functional. Because we get the news god, El Negro Loco, comes in, gives us updates on all the injury news. It's also a terrific follow on Twitter. And that will be something that really determines where I'm going at the shooting guard position, because I think that Colin Sexton could potentially be the best play at the position, or it could be somebody I don't get any exposure to. It all depends on what happens with Darius Garland.
All right. So let's see then. If you wanted to pay down a little bit, and why am I not surprised that a guy that we have deemed Tinderlake likes the Sexland name? It's only fitting. So, DeLon Wright, obviously, who we were talking about before, extreme value, as we know, at 4K with the great projection of basically 7X. You could look at Derrick Rose at $5,800. I'm, looking at guys fixated on guys that are particularly, mid-tier or cheap as compared to even Sexton, who is not obviously expensive. George Hill, who I mentioned before, Duncan Robinson, if you want to go way down, Alec Burks, Josh Richardson, I don't know. It just feels like this is a position. The more I scan the guys that are available to you, this is the position pending James Harden or someone who's in love with Jaylen Brown, like me. This is the position of any that you're looking for your value tonight.
Yeah, so DeLon Wright, we mentioned. Derrick Rose is somebody else who I'm getting exposure to in early builds. So if we look at the Pistons roster, it stinks, right? I mean, that's probably the worst roster in basketball. There's not very much talent. There's not very many high usage guys there. And then we also have to consider that that Blake Griffin is dealing with a concussion. He's been ruled out for at least one more game, and then we'll see when he comes back. But the problem here now with the Pistons is who's going to take shots for them. And if you look at Derrick Rose over the last couple of games, usage rating in the last three, 35%, 31%, and 32%. So it looks like it's Derrick Rose who's picking up a lot of the usage, and his minutes to this point haven't necessarily really been there, but he did close out the last game for them. So with that in mind, I think that we're probably going to potentially see an uptick in playing time for Derrick Rose. And if that's the case, then, and by the way, actually, I forgot that Blake Griffin did play yesterday, except he's ruled out today for rest anyway, so it doesn't matter. So with Blake Griffin not playing, there's still the void there for usage. And it looks like Derrick Rose is going to be picking up a lot of it just based on his usage from the last 3 games. So even at the minutes he's playing right now, he's still producing right around his salary. So if we're able to get a couple extra minutes out of Derrick Rose with his current usage rating, I think he's a chance to be pretty good value at his price point. As a FanDuel specific play, who I know that people will be happy to hear me bring him up again, Eric Bledsoe has been terrific on FanDuel, and he hasn't really been priced up at all yet. He's a lot more expensive on DraftKings than FanDuel, but on FanDuel, he remains priced down at 5,100. That's too cheap. I know that nobody likes Eric Bledsoe other than me, but he has played relatively well in the regular season over the last few years, and his production the last 2 games has been much better than it was earlier in the season. The last 2 games, 25 and 46 FanDuel points. So at his 5,100 price tag, I think that he's underpriced because we have a long track record of him playing well in the regular season. It hasn't translated to the playoffs, but I think that's causing a little bit of bias here where people just don't want anything to do with Eric Bledsoe. And it's let him be priced down on FanDuel, and people will definitely be messaging me in Slack whenever it's working later, making fun of me about Eric Bledsoe because I always bring him up.
Before we get to our next group, you're here with Greg Ehrenberg, Adam Kaufman. Folks, celebrate 2021 with Awesemo Plus, okay? Get 21 days of Awesemo Plus for only $20 when you use the promo code 2021 at checkout. It gives you access to everything Awesemo Plus has to offer, including player projections, ownership projections, lineup builder, so much more. A lot of the stuff that we've been talking about here throughout the first half hour or so of this program. There is more, though. If you love Awesemo, you're looking to commit longer term, we're giving you 20% off an Awesemo Plus yearly platinum pass with promo code HAPPY. Okay, that is promo code HAPPY. This will be our only discount on a yearly pass all year, so you do not want to miss it. Okay, be mindful of that. Before we get to small forwards and just continue on going position by position, just to talk about some of the great Awesemo Plus tools for people that, don't know what they're missing, quite frankly. Lineup builder in particular. Talk to me a little bit for the people that have not experienced it, because I'm sure it's a tool that you play with quite a bit, including maybe this morning to put your, dummy lineups together to get you ready for this show. When it comes to lineup builder and you're looking at the slate and you're putting a full lineup together and examining your salary and your value and your projections and all that stuff, when you get to the end, when you have your lineup in front of you, what are the aspects when it comes to, contrarian percentage and value percentage and overall projection? What are you looking for in particular as you are building a lineup? And maybe the answer is different, GPP versus cash, but what are you looking at?
So something I'll bring up is I like the boom bust tool we have on the site a lot. And it's something I write an article about every day. Because you mentioned the ownership there. And it's one thing to look at ownership and try to figure out who the best plays are. But what I like about the boom bust tool is it has what the odds are of somebody having a game that far exceeds their salary point. It has the odds of somebody far underperforming their salary point. And then also based on simulation results, the odds of somebody ending up in the optimal lineup. So when we consider somebody like Jalen Brunson, we'll say hey, this guy is going to be chalky at, say, whatever, I forget what his 3,300 is price tag on DraftKings. Then you could look at, okay, what's his ownership and what are his actual odds of being in the optimal lineup? And then you could figure, well, is he worth playing based on what his price point is? What his price point and his ownership is. And then you can get an idea of, all right, so maybe he's going to be 40% owned, but he might have a 70% chance being in the optimal lineup. So even though he's really popular, it still might be an indication that perhaps he's not popular enough.
Okay. What about as far as lineup builder when it comes to the projected points that it gives you? You might put a lineup together and it says, 275 projected points. Are you simply trying to mix and match and just get to the highest projected point total and it's that simple, or are there other facets of lineup building that you're looking to achieve within that?
Well, so I'm playing generally 150 lineups on individual sites. So there's a tough balance of I want to play a bunch of lineups and I want to have them projected well, but I also want to have somewhat of a diverse portfolio, right? I don't just want 5 players that are in 100% of my lineups. Yeah. So there's always a point of how do I be a little bit contrarian? How do I make lineups that don't have the best value per se in all of them, but at the same time try to figure out a way that it's not an overall net negative EV lineup, because I don't want to be contrarian just for the sake of being contrarian. I want it to be contrarian but still be a good lineup. So one thing I'll do when I'm building lineups is, and I think Alex makes this point all the time, is you want to compare your top projected lineup to some of the bottom projected your lineups that you're playing. Because if there's a point where there's a massive gap between, say, your 80th created lineup and your first created lineup, then maybe the 80th created lineup is just not plus EV, and you don't want to play it. So that's something I'm always looking at, is when I make a lot of lineups, how do I differentiate without just making crappy lineups?
Fair enough. All right, let's go to small forwards here and continue our discussion position by position. You are watching the NBA Strategy Show. You have got right at the top of the list a guy that you don't like tonight, Jason Tatum, who is projected for about 45 points. You want to go down just a little bit, fair amount, I guess, salary-wise. You can pay down about $1,000 and go to Jimmy Butler, who's projected for a very similar total and 5.5 times value. You obviously have more expensive guys as well available to you. Ben Simmons, who's actually not projected to have quite as good a night. Some other top tier guys like Brandon Ingram, or obviously Jaylen Brown is eligible for multiple positions. We talked about him, Chris Middleton. So who at that upper level do you like most?
All right. So talking about Jason Tatum, I actually, point per dollar, I think he's an okay play, but here's why I don't think I'm going to end up with a lot of exposure to him. Assuming that we get some guys like James Harden and Luka Doncic out, I just think there's going to be so much value on the slate that's going to set up where I want to go a little bit more of a stars and scrubs build. So the actual price on Jason Tatum, yeah, in initial builds, I am getting some exposure to him, but I don't expect that's going to be the case later in the day. But so your question earlier, if we are comparing Jason Tatum to Jaylen Brown, if we had to roster one of them, it would be Jason Tatum for me, because they're priced about the same. And if we're trying to project out future production for the rest of the year, Jason Tatum is still the guy that I ultimately think is going to be the better player and score more fantasy points. So Tatum is the better play of the two. I just don't expect I'm going to end up on a lot of Tatum because we have so many key players that are questionable. I think that's ultimately going to open up other spots I want to go to. If you are rostering Jason Tatum at 8,600, I don't necessarily think that's going to be terrible, but my hunch is that better options are going to open up as the night goes on. And there is somebody you mentioned there that I think from a points per dollar sense makes a lot more sense in Jimmy Butler for $1,200 cheaper on DK.
Okay, so if you're looking toward Jimmy Butler then, and I agree with you, I think, for a variety of reasons, he does make more sense. You start to think about paying down a little bit. I guess I'm kind of more looking toward the $5,000 or so dollar tier. You have Darius Bazley, Harrison Barnes, Josh Richardson, Kelly Oubre, obviously. You could go down to value territory, look at Sadiq Bey, who's projected to have a solid night, about 6x value on the Awesemo projections. Dorian Finney-Smith's a good guy as well. You go way down, JJ Redick, $3,300, who's projected to exceed his value. So what do you think? Who do you like?
Yeah, so a couple of those guys you mentioned, like Dorian Finney-Smith, he's somebody that could benefit also if Luka Doncic is out. But given the information we have right now, I think that Sadiq Bey makes for the best play in this price point, or at his price point at 3,900 if we're going cheap. So Bey started the other day when Blake Griffin was out. He ended up scoring 32 fantasy points. The usage is pretty high for him. When he gets on the court, he's not afraid to shoot. He has a usage rating north of 20% this year. We've seen him have a game against the Warriors where his usage was as high as 29%. So in that start against your Celtics, where the Pistons improbably ended up winning that game, Sadiq Bey started, the Pistons won 96-93. Bey took 11 shots, usage rating over 20%, 17 real life points, put up a pretty well-rounded line. So at 3,900, assuming he starts again, which I think he will because Blake Griffin's out, and he started the last time that Griffin was out, I think that he stands to gain the most in that situation. Something else to note also is the Pistons are playing the Bucks, and that's a game that could very likely be a blowout. We've seen a ton of blowouts this year, more than we've ever seen before. Bucks are favored by a pretty healthy amount in that game. Wouldn't surprise me if they end up winning the game by like 25 points or 30 or something like that. Even if that is the case, Bey is going to be on the court in the fourth quarter. So the blowout is not really a concern for him. And you could even make a case that a blowout would help his production, just because instead of playing against a tough Bucks starting lineup, he'd be playing against backups and the end of bench guys in garbage time. So Bey, I think at 3,900 is definitely somebody to roster.
All right, power forwards. This is where the fun's at. You know, we were looking at some of these positions that there are a lot of value, great pay down options. I think if you're apt to spend up, this is a place where you're thinking about doing it, or power forward or center, guys that are eligible for both spots anyway. There's Giannis, who is projected to have a strong night, almost 60 points. Julius Randle, who has overall had some great production this year. Domantas Sabonis. Tatum is eligible for this slot as well. Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, Pascal Siakam, Jeremy Grant, Tobias Harris. I'm just kind of, going up and down the list of some of these upper guys. You do want to save some money, or you're looking toward your utility or flex forward spot. Marvin Bagley is an option for you. Oubre, who we talked about before. Sadiq Bey, obviously. But that upper tier, you can't roster all of them, Greg. So who do you like?
Yeah, so this is another situation where Giannis becomes very easy to roster if Doncic and Harden are out. We just have a ton of value. So the amount of exposure I get to Giannis is once again going to depend on mainly if Luka plays or not. Because if Luka's out, where we just have Jalen Brunson to plug in as a value play, it's going to be really easy to get up to Giannis. So in that situation, Giannis is going to end up being one of my more owned players. And 10,800 on DraftKings, FanDuel 11,400, still a reasonable price tag for Giannis, because last year, his price tag on FanDuel, even if that seems a little steep, he got priced over 12,000 at his peak last year. So 11,400 isn't too bad. I think that he is the guy to pay up for if the salary allows for it. If not, I'm going to go a little cheaper if we don't get all the value on the slate. And I think Zion's the one who stands out the most. I know his minutes have been really frustrating this year, but he's going to be a stud. And the minutes are not really a concern this year, as long as he stays out of foul trouble. The issue is that he's gotten into foul trouble a decent amount this year. That's a little hard to predict, and I can't just straight out come and say that Zion will or will not get into foul trouble. But look at him in games where he hasn't gotten into foul issues. He played 33 minutes last game. Earlier in the season, a game against the Spurs, he played 38 minutes. Against the Heat, he played 38 minutes. So in most games where he's able to keep his hands to himself, doesn't pick up like 3 fouls immediately, I think we could safely project and play around 35 minutes in those games. And given his point per minute production, he's too cheap. And a lot of that's just because of some of his recent foul struggles.
Marco says, I'd rather pay up for Luka than Giannis. And obviously that's pending health. But how do you feel about that debate?
Yeah, I mean, that was what I said at the top when you asked me if you can only pay up for one guy on the slate and we assume everybody's healthy, who will it be? I said for me, it's Luka. The issue is just we don't know right now if he's healthy or not. So I agree with that, though. If everybody's healthy, if we find out that there's no injuries, everybody gets magically healed at noon today, whenever the next injury report comes out, everybody's injuries are fixed, then yeah, Luka's going to be the guy for me. I'm just not sure that's the case yet.
Clayton says Sabonis is going to put Zion in early foul trouble. Big fade on Zion tonight.
Hey, it could happen. I hope not, because that's not how I'm going to be building my lineups. I certainly hope that Zion stays out of foul trouble and plays well. The last 3 games for Zion have not been great. The 2 of them, though, were low minutes due to foul trouble and a blowout. Last game, 31 fantasy points in a pretty tough matchup against the Raptors. But still, you go back to his point per minute production last year, and he was one of the best point per minute fantasy producers in the entire league. The only reason it didn't necessarily translate to him being one of the highest priced and highest scoring fantasy players was because he had all those weird restrictions. There was back-to-backs where he would rest. There was other games where he'd come in and he was only playing like 18 minutes or 22 minutes. But if you extrapolate his production from last year over 36 minutes, then you're talking about one of the top fantasy producers in the entire league. And I think that is going to be the case this year. So I don't think there's a very big window to buy low on Zion. Also, his price isn't all that, his ownership isn't all that high right now. Project for 10% ownership on DraftKings. FanDuel a little higher at around 20%, but still, I think for a guy like Zion, who's really a generational prospect, and I think should be one of the highest priced players in the league when the season's over, assuming everything goes how I expect it to, I think that we're going to look back on Zion being priced in the 7K range and think like, oh, I can't believe that this guy was this cheap and we didn't roster him at one point.
So if you're paying down at the power forward spot, is this where we start to talk about or continue on the conversation, I guess, with the likes of Sadiq Bey and Dorian Finney-Smith and, guys like that? I'm trying to think of who else. Oubre is not, he's certainly a pay down next to Giannis. He's not, super value, obviously. You could look at,
so I'll bring up somebody.
Guys along those lines, yeah.
There's no information on this yet, but I have a hunch. So Dwight Powell is coming off of a torn Achilles, And I do not think he's going to be playing in back-to-backs this year. We don't have any sample on this because we haven't seen the Mavericks play in back-to-backs. But I have a feeling when we get an injury report that comes out later in the day, Dwight Powell is going to be resting because I just can't see him coming back from an Achilles injury and playing in back-to-backs. He's looked fine when he's been on the court. He looks a little bit less explosive, but still coming back from an injury like that, generally the way that we see teams approach it is rest players. And also you have to consider last year with Kristaps Porzingis coming off a torn ACL, the Mavericks rested him in back-to-back situations for the first half of the season. So given that precedent, I think that's what we're going to see with Powell this year. So with that in mind, I think that Maxi Kleber becomes a really good value play. He played well last night also with Luka out. So that's something else to think about too, is that if Luka and Powell are both out, then Kleber's really going to have to play a substantial role. But as of right now, Kleber, who's not really projecting for that much ownership, 14%, I think that's probably going to change as the day goes on because I'm pretty sure we're going to end up seeing that Dwight Powell is ruled out, and then we're going to see Kleber as one of the top value plays on the slate projection-wise.
Let's wrap with the center spot then. You've got obviously Giannis, Joel Embiid, Andre Drummond, Julius Randle, Domantas Sabonis. You got Vooch, Zion, Bam Adebayo. You could pay down, look at Mason Plumlee, Bagley, who we've talked about. Who do you like at the big man position?
Yeah, so I think if we're paying up for somebody, for me, it's going to be Joel Embiid. I don't necessarily think we have to pay up at the center position, but if I'm going to roster one guy on the high end, it's going to be Embiid for me. And I really like the moves the Sixers made in the offseason. Kaufman isn't going to like me saying this, but I think the Sixers are the best.
They had a good offseason. You bring in a guy who knows what he's doing.
I think they're the best team in the division. And I also think, if just talking about from a betting purpose, I think this is probably the last window to bet on the 76ers at relatively long odds to win the Atlantic Conference. I have them at 4-1 right now. I think books still have them up as long as 3-1. That's too long for me because I think that this is going to be a really good team this year. And it just has to do with the chemistry, right? So they got rid of Al Horford. They got rid of Josh Richardson. These are good players, but the fit is so much better now. When you add Danny Green and Seth Curry into that starting lineup, these are two 40% three-point shooters. All of a sudden, you have a lot more space for these guys to operate. So Ben Simmons, I think, could be more effective. Joel Embiid, who I think is live to win MVP this year, I think that he's going to have a massive season for them. And he also has less competition for rebounds, playing in a smaller front court without Al Horford. I think the floor spacing is going to make it so he's a handful to guard in the post. I think he's going to give teams all kinds of issues. And then you also look at the matchup against the Charlotte Hornets, where there's no Cody Zeller there. So they're a lot weaker defensively. He's going to be facing defense from PJ Washington, who, even though Washington's fine, Joel Embiid is a huge size mismatch for him. Mm-hmm. So paying up for a center, I think Joel Embiid is the way to go. And also somebody who's a little bit underpriced right now on DraftKings. He is a sub 10K price tag on both FanDuel and DraftKings. And that really shouldn't be the case for Embiid.
Maybe it's a spot that other people are looking elsewhere, because just looking around in the chat here, there's love for Clint Capella and Holmes, Robert Williams, Time Lord with Tristan Thompson resting on back-to-backs. There, Bismack Biyombo, let's see, Tobias. He was talking about Tobias Harris before. Steven Adams. There are a lot of wood, lot of love for Wood tonight here in this one.
A lot of wood in the chat. You heard it from Kaufman first.
A lot of wood in the chat. Christian Wood, of course. $7,400 on DraftKings, looking at about 5x value on the projections.
So there's a name you mentioned there that I really like in the mid-range, and that is Clint Capella. So Capella, who we've never really seen him play with the Hawks until the last couple of games, really, because they traded for him last year at the trade deadline, but then he was injured. He didn't make a debut with them. And then the Hawks didn't make the bubble. So we just never saw Capella play with Atlanta last year. And then he started the season with a minutes restriction, so we didn't get to see a whole ton of him then. The minutes restriction's coming off. The last two games, he played 30 and 31 minutes, so that's no longer a concern. And if you look at what he did last game, double-double, 16 points and 16 rebounds, kind of broke the slate for his price point. And it hasn't gone up quite enough, because if we look at the historical pricing on Clint Capella, he finished last year priced at $8,200 before he got traded from the Rockets. So when you consider somebody who now no longer has a minutes restriction, he was an 8,200 player, and now he's priced all the way down to 6,100 just because he opened the season with playing, like 20 minutes per game. We don't have to worry about that anymore. He's probably $1,500 or so too cheap. So Clint Capella, this is probably the last buy low window on him after he put up that big double-double last game and played 31 minutes. So Capella, I think he's trending upwards in a pretty big way, and the salary is not caught up with him yet.
Anyone else that we haven't talked about across all the positions that we haven't, that you'd want to highlight for the people? I think we've obviously mentioned a lot of names. There's no question about that. But anyone that maybe isn't quite on people's radar?
So I think here's somebody that you like. I think Tristan Thompson's a pretty good value play at center. So Thompson, who has played, well for the Celtics when he's been out there, the minutes haven't necessarily been huge for him, but I don't think they have to be at this price point because you look at the last 3 games, 29 fantasy points, 28, 24. So at the 4,400 price tag, I think he's just a little bit too cheap. I think he's safe. There isn't necessarily the highest ceiling on him, but even so, I think that the salary of 4,400, that's too low. He's not picking up all that much ownership. So if you really need to save salary at the center position, I think that Tristan Thompson's a pretty good cash game play and somebody will have some exposure to in tournaments as well.
Like this, and I think this is something people often wonder when they're leading up to lineup lock and wondering how to set their lineups. Super chat from Looser. Tell us where to get our news, Greg.
So the best place to get
Plug Central here. Here it comes.
The best place to get your news is from my friend and yours, the news god, El Negro Loco DFS on Twitter. He is on top of I don't even know how he does it. It makes no sense. I see Jordan Klein, GPP winning producer in the background nodding his head around as I talk about this. I don't understand how this is possible. This is Woj tweets something and it's like El Negro Loco, the news guy, he's had this information 5 minutes ago. He knows what Woj is going to tweet before he does. He's got all the injury news. He's on top of everything. So if you follow him on Twitter, I'm telling you, he retweets everything and has all the news out immediately. He has, I don't know what kind of system he has at home, but he's like wired in like it's the Matrix to the news center, and he just has everything out immediately. It's one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. He works really hard. So everybody should follow him on Twitter and definitely get all updates from him because he's awesome.
Well, and he's constantly posting, timely posts, as Greg noted, obviously, in the Awesemo Premium Slack channel when it comes to the NBA breaking news. So you want to be part of it. You want to get in there and, you don't even, obviously follow the guy on Twitter, but that's just be in the channel and you'll see all the tweets. Everything gets immediately posted in there. And there are so many great articles on Awesemo. There's the deep dive article and so many others, the boom bust, as Greg talked about, that he writes, and salary savers values there. You could have a solid handful of articles available to you just on Awesemo's website leading up to lock every single night, not to mention programming that we have that you want to be with us for throughout the day. And on that note, by the way, this being Monday, while we are on the verge of wrapping up here in the next few minutes, you're going to have the PGA DFS first look coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern, 5 o'clock, the NBA deep dive, which will be an hour-long show taking you into NBA live before lock. And, Laffy and Adam and Josh and Greg, all those guys will be around for that. So, right now, this is just tip of the iceberg in terms of your coverage. This is where you can goof around, experiment, consider who you want your lineups. But when it comes to actually making those pressing decisions before things become finalized, that's the stuff that you want to be watching.
Yeah, for sure. And as of right now, we went over some of the injuries, but who knows what's going to happen. We've got like 24 key players that are on the injury report today. So it's definitely going to be important to tune into live before lock, which I think I'm doing with Josh today. And then we'll figure out, by then we'll know hopefully most of the news. And then Josh and I'll be able to figure out like, hey, these are the people we're actually rostering, as opposed to me guessing, like, I think these are the guys I'm going to roster. But then later in the day, we'll have a much better feel for it, and we'll be able to go over all of that.
Well, and by then, hopefully Slack is working and we can all be in touch with one another. That would be a nice, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to pull up Slack just while, we've been talking, and nope, nothing. I open it up, it basically laughs at me.
Yeah, well, so over the next couple weeks, you try to DM me on Slack. I'll just pretend it's not working. I'll be like, oh, I didn't see it. They didn't. Slack's down. It's like,
must
no,
be
great.
An issue with my router. That's what it is. The Wi-Fi. Let me go restart it.
Yeah, they fixed Slack 10 days ago. Not on my phone. They didn't, Kaufman. Not on my phone.
Still messed up. Gonna have to call somebody. Thanks to everyone for hanging out here with us over the course of the last almost an hour anyway. And apologies again for the late start, but hopefully technical difficulties will be behind us in a hurry, certainly for programming for the rest of this day and over the course of the week. I'll be back here doing this show again Thursday morning, albeit about 15 minutes earlier. The NBA strategy show. I don't think I'm with you. I think that might just be a Monday pleasurable experience that we get to share together. I'm going to be with Josh for that one, so that's okay. It's a wonderful experience of a different kind.
Yeah, I think it's more fun doing the show with me though. But I mean, it's whatever. It's personal preference. Like he'll be like, yeah, I like doing shows with Josh. But yeah, I mean, it's whatever. I mean, he'll be out there. He'll be out there. He's gonna hawk for likes all show, and then he'll be telling people like, oh, look, people like me more because they liked my video X amount of times. But
Yeah.
it's only because he's over there selling out, trying to ask everybody for likes. But what's really important is that you subscribe to the YouTube channel, because that's what the boss men really like, is they like to see that people did shows and people subscribe to the YouTube channel after. So yeah, likes are nice, but also subscribe, because that's when you can find out when we're going live for Live Before Lock and all the other stuff that's on the channel, like the golf show that's also coming up later that you mentioned.
Yeah, Lofty tells you all the time, folks, we're making the push to 50,000 subscribers on YouTube, sitting at 46.8 right now. So absolutely, while we appreciate the likes, great for the algorithm and all that good stuff, hit that subscribe button and let's get there by the end of the NBA season. I know we can. Go to the YouTube page if you're watching anywhere else. I'm not sure where that would be, but be with us here on YouTube and smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, all the good stuff. But for Greg, for our producer Jordan, for Jason Tatum, who is elite, I am Adam Kaufman. Thanks for being with us, and enjoy the programming the rest of the day.